Hello there. The worldwide sympathy for the death of Queen Elizabeth II is great, but the touching pictures of the royals and citizens in front of the palaces hide the fact that not everyone mourns the monarch, and that has historical reasons, and also some current ones. When nobody could have imagined that the eternal Queen Elizabeth II would one day be gone, a student campaign at the British University of Oxford made the headlines. In June 2021, students decided to hang a portrait of the monarch in a lounge. And the reason for this was, for some, the image of the monarch symbolizes the recent colonial history of Great Britain. Instead, a more neutral work of art should be hung with which everyone, regardless of background, could feel comfortable. So they took the picture down. The indignation at this insult to majesty was great. The then British Minister for Education, Gavin Williamson, rumbled and called the students' decision absurd. The Queen is the head of state and symbolizes the best of Britain, he said. During her reign, she worked tirelessly to promote British values of tolerance, openness, and respect around the world. For real? Those affected and historians are likely to see things differently. In view of the death of the Queen a few days ago, in addition to the expressions of condolence and respect, critical voices are now being heard more and more. I paid respect too, but I can't keep quiet about the other side. The main focus is on the colonial legacy of the royals. In an interview with a German newspaper, Hamburg historian Jürgen Zimmerer accused the British royal family of personally benefiting from colonialism. And further, it's about values of millions of euros from exploitation. It has been known for decades that precious stones from colonial raids are used in the crown jewels. The professor at the University of Hamburg's Global History Department accused the late monarch of having never made any critical comments about British colonialism. The British ruler committed colonial crimes in Malaysia, Kenya, and Egypt in particular, explained the colonial history expert, and he said it's all happening during their tenure. The Queen was decisively responsible for British politics. In the colony of Malaysia, the British army committed war crimes, while in Kenya it brutally cracked down on the Mau Mau resistance movement. That's what Zimmerer explained. Independence fighters and their families were locked up in concentration camps and were tortured. And all in the months following the death of the Queen's father, King George VI. There are now compensation judgments from courts in London. In addition, Britain and France occupied the Suez Canal with a military intervention in 1956 after Egypt nationalized it. All of this happened during her tenure, and she never took a critical stance on it later. Criticism broke out quickly, especially on social media, after Elizabeth's death became known. Roughly every 6 days, a country celebrates its independence from Britain, commented one Twitter user. This occasion is the most widespread public holiday in the world. Had the Queen apologized for slavery, colonialism, and neocolonialism, and called on the Crown to make reparations for the millions of lives sacrificed in their name, perhaps I would do the humane thing and feel bad, the university tweeted. And Professor Mukoma Vangugi said, as a Kenyan, I don't feel anything. This theater is absurd. Kenya has been under British rule since 1895. It was officially declared a colony in 1920 and only gained independence in 1963, 11 years after Elizabeth II ascended the throne. The Queen's legacy began with colonialism and is still woven into it, says Farouk Kerogi, a communications professor at Kansas State University in Georgia. And he said to the CNN, "No amount of compassion or sympathy that her death aroused can erase that." It's also true that many states became independent during Elizabeth's long reign. It was a post-colonial era that the Queen helped shape. The former colonies from Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean were merged into the Commonwealth, a loose federation that now consists of 56 sovereign states. The Queen and now King Charles III are still heads of state of some of these states, the so-called Commonwealth realms. Throughout her life, Elizabeth II worked to ensure that the group remained as a unit. It is undisputed that the Queen has visited the African continent on numerous occasions and has spoken to the local leaders and citizens. In this context, the monarch is also perceived by some African observers as a stabilizing force that brought about a positive change towards more independence during her reign. But you don't get a storm of jubilation or standing ovation, but at least this was a step in the right direction. However, the monarch never initiated a broad public debate on this subject. But the pressure to speak out about past atrocities and injustices in the name of colonialism is growing. This was made clear not least by the individual action at the University of Oxford. The debate was also fueled by allegations of racism related to Duchess Meghan, which she and her husband Prince Harry brought up themselves. And it was also the youngest son of King Charles III who, in July 2020, openly addressed the need for Commonwealth states to come to terms with their colonial past. There are also individual states that are further breaking away from the British crown. Jamaica, for example, and the Caribbean island of Antigua and Barbuda, which only became independent in 1981. They are probably to become a republic according to the will of the head of government. That was announced by Prime Minister Gaston Brown this weekend. Barbados is long past this process. The British royal family seems to have understood that silence is no longer a solution. The younger generation in particular is trying to calm things down. In the spring, William and Kate embarked on an 8-day trip to the Caribbean. At times, it was like running the gauntlet. The protests and critical overtones could not be ignored in Belize, Jamaica, and the Bahamas. The royals did not remain silent either. In Jamaica, where under British rule hundreds of thousands of people who had been abducted from Africa were exploited on sugar plantations, Prince William took the floor. At a state banquet, he called Britain's historic role in the slave trade abhorrent and described it as a blot on our history, so their history. I would like to express my deepest regrets, he said, without explicitly apologizing. Slavery should never have happened. He pointed out that his father Charles had previously condemned slavery. The points of criticism also include the fact that Great Britain repeatedly boasts that it abolished slavery as early as 1834, analyzes the German press agency. What is often not mentioned, however, is that it was accompanied by massive compensation for slave owners, which the country paid for until 2015. So far, however, there has been no financial compensation for the former slaves and their descendants. CNN calls it a complexity of the Queen's legacy, which, despite its great popularity in parts of the world where the British Empire had once spread, was also seen as a symbol of oppression. Historian Zimmerer told the German newspaper Tagesspiegel, "I have a suspicion that she was so popular because she never stepped on anyone's toes, except for her initial refusal to grant a state funeral after Diana's death. But there she quickly gave in." Criticism of Britain's colonial legacy is not necessarily linked to the person of the Queen, but to the British monarchy as such, said the historian Matthew Smith in an interview with US broadcaster NBC. It's about the relationship of this institution to systems of oppression and forced exploitation of workers, especially African workers, as well as the exploitation of natural resources and the enforcement of control system in these places, said the professor from University College London. And that's a system that exists beyond the person of Queen Elizabeth. And I think, as I said, I paid respect on the day of her death, but if there are different views, I have to talk about them, and I think it's important. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.